Throughout history, art has been used as a means of expression. Human thoughts and emotions are complex things. They're so complex that when we try to put them into words, we often feel we haven't done them justice. We feel something has been lost in translation from us to the listener. But a picture says 1,000 words, and that's where art comes in. Artistic expression is using various techniques to create artworks inspired by these complex thoughts and emotions. Let's look at an example. This person falls in love. They meet someone. They have their doubts.
Oh, I can't. I have a couple parties I have to hit.
But over the course of weeks, they let their guard down.
Okay, I guess I could do Sunday.
In their head, they start to believe they had been wrong all this time. And they create a new perception of life. And then they discover they've been deceived.
You understand me? Lying.
Their world comes crashing down. They don't know what to think anymore. They could talk about how this feels all day long and still not feel at all understood. But if that person is a musical composer, they can pour their emotions into an arrangement of chords. Perhaps when you hear the chords they arranged, you might feel something of what they felt. This is how arts can be a creative outlet, inspired by things life makes us feel. Music is one art form to communicate your inspiration to the listener, but how about using a game to communicate your inspiration to the player? Let's do a quick two-step emotional experiment to look at this. Take a second to try and think how this man felt when he unfortunately lost his mother. Each person has their own capacity for empathy, but to be honest, unless an experience in your life allows you to specifically relate to him, it's just not possible to understand the contemplative and emotional journey he went on in the days, weeks, months, and years that followed that loss. Step 2, and this assumes you have played Final Fantasy VII. How did you feel the first time you saw this? This man is actually Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. He is the producer of Final Fantasy VII. He lost his mother while working on an earlier game in the series, and it made him think a lot about life and death. That experience inspired Final Fantasy VII. This inspiration went through many creative minds, hands, and changes, and it eventually led to the character of Aerith and her death. Sakaguchi's contemplations inspired him to write the original concept of the life stream. He made a story about life by creating a world with a life stream.
The life stream. That's what we call the river of life that circles our planet.
To show the need to cherish it, he made an evil in the game, which was damaging the life stream.
The Shinra Electric Power Company discovered a way to use the life stream as an energy source.
This is because, as producer, Sakaguchi believed to understand life, you must contemplate death. This is where we get the impending death of the planet from.
Because of Shinra's energy, we were able to live very comfortable lives. But wasn't that because we were taking away from the planet's life? A lot of people thought so.
But the life and death of a planet is an abstract concept. So Kitase and Nomura decided to have the player connect with the theme through the party. This is why we get the death of Aerith. There are a lot of games where someone dies and you don't feel anything. But Final Fantasy VII isn't like that, because it's not just part of the plot. The creators are inspired by a specific emotion and are using their artwork to portray that to you, the player. And when you have a message like that being poured into visuals, audio, and characters, you get something really special. A theme inspires a game in many ways. Let's look at a simple example from Final Fantasy VII and then a more complex example of Final Fantasy X. In Final Fantasy VII, the theme of life heavily influences the game. Thinking about it led to the life stream concept. The evil Shinra are damaging the life stream. They use their Mako reactor to suck the life out of the planet, belittling the theme of life itself. Barret and Tifa are the heroes. They bomb the reactor. In doing so, they stand up for the importance of life. As the protagonists, they must rise against the antagonist philosophy on the theme of life. But we also need a journey where they learn about the theme. And that's where Cloud comes in. Cloud is introduced as an ex-Shinra soldier. He helps Tifa and Barret bomb the reactor, but makes it exceedingly clear he doesn't care about the life stream. He will undergo a journey to learn about life through Aerith and her death. Cloud is built to learn the things the writers wanted to say to us, the players, and that's what makes him the main character. As an antagonist, Shinra's view on life is quite straightforward. They don't respect its value. Final Fantasy X follows a very similar inspiration, but the antagonist's philosophy is much more detailed than Shinra's. The theme for Final Fantasy X is grief. The word they used in the English dub is sorrow, so for the sake of quoting, let's roll with that. Sorrow inspires Final Fantasy X even more thoroughly than life inspired Final Fantasy VII. Sorrow is a constant presence throughout the world of Final Fantasy X, like a never-ending spiral that eternally traps everything within it. They even named the world after the spiral, Spira. To understand the game's stance on sorrow, let's look at a quote from the bonus album. There is a song sung to the hymn of the faith, and part of the lyrics say, "Ushinau koasa wa dare mo onaji," meaning, when it comes to the fear of losing something, we are all the same. The message is that everybody hurts. And because of this, everyone in the game is given their own sorrow. Every character, every city, every civilization, and every villain all have their own sorrow. But if everyone is in sorrow, how can the protagonists have a learning journey? It's quite simple. It's about how you deal with it. The antagonist Yevon has a number of extremely negative reactions to sorrow. And the hero's journey will be to throw away these tendencies and cut open a new path.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Those words stayed with me.
Yevon is the final boss of the game. He lived in Zanarkand before it was destroyed 1,000 years ago. He is the father of Yunalesca. He is the one that taught Yunalesca that sorrow is almighty and cannot be defeated.
Sorrow cannot be abolished. It is meaningless to try.
His fear of loss, of sorrow, was born for Zanarkand when Bevel came to destroy it. And out of that fear, sin was born. Because of sin, the people of Spira are in constant fear of losing the people they love. The only way to end this chain is to break the first link, Yevon's inability to face his fear. So what exactly happened to Yevon? How was sin born, and why is there a religion in Yevon's name? Yevon experiences a lot of common emotions regarding loss. You might have seen the stages of grief model that it is said people go through before they can move on. Well, Final Fantasy X creates its own stages of grief model using the spiral of sorrow. The spiral is built on negative reactions to sorrow. Let's use Yevon's backstory to build the model together. First principle. 1,000 years ago, before Yevon was this creepy little thing that looks like a black heart surrounded in a loose ribcage, he was the strongest summoner of Zanarkand. But Machina grew to be even stronger than summoners. This power struggle started the Machina War between Bevel and Yevon's Zanarkand. Bevel gained a win condition by enslaving the Albed to fight for them. You see, the Albed couldn't use magic or summoning, but they were amazing at developing and operating Machina. Yevon feared that the Al-Bid would be the end of him and Zanarkand. He blamed them for his suffering. Blame is unhealthy. It suggests that someone else's suffering is the key to ending your own.
If we atone for our crimes, sin will stop coming back, yeah?
Next principle. The Al-Bid didn't actually destroy Zanarkand. Yevon just acted in fear that they would. Submitting to fear is unhealthy because it halts us in place, preventing us from ever facing our sorrow. In fear of losing it all, Yevon convinced the people of Zanarkand to become faith so they could summon a dream version of their city where they would never have to let go. Together, the people of Zanarkand united in sorrow by singing the hymn of the faith. They became faith and summoned a dream of their home where they could close their eyes to reality and hide from the fear of loss. This is basically denial, and it's unhealthy because it's just a temporary distraction that doesn't solve anything. It's a false security.
Praying for victory's all good. But is this right?
The players fight with all their strength. The fans cheer for their favorite team. They forget pain, suffering. Only the game matters.
Whatever you say.
Finally, we have the birth of sin. Dream Zanarkand is a bubble for Yevon to hide in, and the last thing he wants is for that bubble to burst. Yevon made sin to protect the bubble by destroying all the Machina cities. This is a metaphor for lashing out at others so that you can be alone with your sorrow. I think this is something we can all relate to. Pain sucks. If you have a nasty wound, the last thing you want is anyone touching it. That hurts. Sorrow is like a nasty wound on your heart. And if you're trying not to think about it, the last thing you want is people asking you how you're doing. That reminds you of it. That hurts. This can lead us to covering up our sorrow by pushing others away. It is unhealthy because if you suppress your sorrow below the surface, you also provide a safe place within you for it to live and grow. These principles make up the spiral model of Final Fantasy X. This is the antagonist's philosophy towards sorrow that the heroes must overcome through their journey. The creators built Final Fantasy X by using this model as inspiration. They turn Yevon's philosophy into a religion. They create a literal journey to overcome the philosophy by turning its principles into landmarks. Yuna starts the game on a pilgrimage to face Spira's sorrow, sin, by visiting the temples and mastering Yevon's philosophy towards sin or sorrow. Tidus is actually part of Yevon's denial, and he spends most of the game wanting to return to it. Yuna will learn that they need to throw away Yevon's philosophy or religion and find a new way to fight sin or sorrow.
My father wanted to make Spiro's sorrow go away, not just cover it up with lies.
Tidus will face the fact that denial needs to be relinquished.
I have to go.
This is how Final Fantasy X, like Final Fantasy VII, has the characters learn the things that the creators wanted to say to us, the players. Much like Cloud and Aerith went on a journey to understand life through death, Tidus and Yuna go on a journey to learn to fight sorrow with a healthier method. Remember the Aerith moment? We said that the metaphor of the life stream and the death of the planet were quite abstract, so this scene was created to affect the player with the same message. Final Fantasy X does this too. The metaphor of sin and Yevon are abstract, so the idea of letting go of your denial to face your sorrow was portrayed through the ending, which I believe to be one of the most powerful moments in video game history. The denial of Dream Zanarkand takes human form in Tidus. Alongside Yuna, the player builds a bond with Tidus throughout the game. This setup ensures that we will experience the pain of loss alongside her. It allows us to understand just how hard it can be to let go of a dream. The genius of this is that as Yuna loses Tidus, You feel what Yevon felt when he lost Zanarkand. It puts you in the shoes of the antagonist and brings you to tears through the sorrow he felt. If that's not art, I honestly don't know what is. Yuna initially reacts to this with denial, but instead of holding on to the past, she thanks it. She keeps him in her heart, but allows him to move on. That is the true message that inspires Final Fantasy X. That is the journey of the heroes, to transition from Yevon's method of denial to their own story of acceptance. Accept it, but never forget.
いなくなってしまった人たちのこと、時々でいいから。思い出してください。